All right, well, it's really exciting to get this session started. It's been a long time coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dina Sherif. I'm the Executive Director of the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at MIT. And I just want to say that it's an incredible pleasure to co-host this panel with my dear friend and also Legatum Foundry Fellow, Delila Khaled, who is the founder of ImpaXus. I also want to recognize that this work that we're doing and this panel and the following roundtable is made possible by EngineeringX and IDRC, my dear friend Wissam Elbey. But I do want to recognize that this event was particularly inspired by Delila's work as an EngineeringX SEAL champion. And she herself has been a real champion around the importance of advancing the role of women in waste management in the circular economy. And through her role as a Foundry Fellow, which we're very proud of at MIT, she's focused a lot on the importance of entrepreneurship and innovation-led ecosystem building across Africa and more globally. So this particular event is a direct response to the UN High-Level Climate Champion's resounding call for radical collaboration to unlock climate finance, accelerate innovation, and increase the inclusion of women, youth, and indigenous people in climate action. There is a word that I learned, well, I knew about, but that Delila brought to the forefront, and that's the triple planetary crisis, so climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, and the role that waste is playing in driving this triple planetary crisis. And I think this conversation is going to bring all of that together really nicely for all of us. And I hope that what this panel will do is to demonstrate the incredible importance of collaboration, the incredible importance of women entrepreneurs in driving the circular economy, and just how innovative they are and important they are, and how we can't afford to move forward without really embracing women entrepreneurs. Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud, for turning your camera on. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our amazing panelists. I just want to apologize. I know that many were looking forward to Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak joining us. Unfortunately, she had a scheduling conflict, but we're very, very excited that Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, who is a dear mentor and somebody I have looked up to for, I would say, about 2 decades now. That probably reveals my age, not necessarily his, who is the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27 and UN Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda. And I would say one of the strongest and most powerful voices around the importance of climate finance. We also have with us Carlos Silva Filho, who is a member of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on Zero Waste and president of the International Solid Waste Association. Professor Linda Godfrey, who really, when I read your bio, I was so impressed and so amazed by the work that you're leading. But she's a manager of the Circular Innovation South Africa and manager of Waste Research and Development Roadmap for the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, who you'll be hearing from a lot today, and for those who will be joining our roundtable, Delila Khaled, who is the founder of ImpaXus and a Legatum Foundry Fellow. She's also, as mentioned, a champion with EngineeringX. And a big advocate for women across the board. So I'd love with that to jump right in. And so Delila, I'm sure it can be no surprise that I'm actually going to start with you. Because you've been the force behind organizing this amazing panel and also the roundtable that will come after, and you will be the lead author in a white paper that will come out that will chart a path forward for all of us. So my question to you is, why are you pushing for greater attention and investment in women entrepreneurs and innovators in particular, and in specific, in combating the global waste crisis?
Thank you, Dina. And I won't digress too much, but thank you so much for that very generous and touching introduction. So really, the 2 reasons, if I could simplify into 2 reasons. First and foremost, I think that there has been a large disconnect between what's going on in terms of the way waste impacts climate change. It's kind of a growing area of understanding. And we typically have thought about waste as kind of limited to plastics recycling, but now we're appreciating in the context of the triple planetary crisis and circular economy, what the broader impact of waste is, and we will go into that more later. So first, making that connection. Second is, and I will again call on the climate champions here, is the impact and innovation potential of women entrepreneurs, and especially when it comes to their indigenous knowledge and innovating to solve for local problems. You know, the climate champions have consistently said what we need to address this crisis that we're in is innovation, inclusion, and finance. And when it comes to those three things, we know that women deliver. On innovation, gender diversity, on entrepreneurship, we just had EIB come out with this awesome study, their annual finance assessment in Africa, working with 50-some banks, and they found that across the board, women-led organizations, women-led companies were not only more resilient, but more innovative than male-led companies. When it comes to inclusion, we also know the stats on women, that by default, they solve for society's problems, and they tend to put both people and planet in at least equally important, if not so, than profits. And then finally, when it comes to finance, we also know that women entrepreneurs, again, not to call out on the men, but it's women entrepreneurs outperform men. They're more capital efficient. They deliver more returns on investment with less money invested. So when it comes to both an environmental crisis and an economic crisis, I really believe women are our best bet for delivering innovation and for delivering prosperity.
I don't think there's a better way to start this panel than with that kind of passion. So I have to switch to you, Dr. Mahmoud, because as a climate champion, you have been constantly calling upon non-state actors to pursue the kind of collaboration that's required to accelerate climate change. And I know that you have been a huge advocate for women being at the very center of that. But how can we really ensure that women come to the center and stay at the center of climate investments and initiatives related specifically to waste management?
Right. Thank you so much. It's a great honor for me to join this panel, and all of you have great deal of involvement, contributions to the areas and topics we're discussing today. Whenever I'm speaking about women and gender, my only daughter would remind me, say anything, but don't say empowerment. She gets irritated.
Yes, me too. I'm with your daughter.
All right.
It's a terrible word.
Yeah, she's an engineer, so she is from Dartmouth. So she say, well, whomever can empower can disempower. So don't make me at the mercy of those who may assume that they have the power somewhere. What we need is a fair chance and fair opportunity. And I think she's becoming more right. But that actually, I was trying to say that happened after a great deal of decades of empowering women to say that. Because before that was not really suitable. Now, many women are in a position today that they don't need the help; they just need the fair and level playing field to achieve what they are after. And I'm proud of this. On the work, I'm coming from the background of sustainable development, on finance. I had a couple of initiatives when I was at the World Bank. Now I'm trying to put that with my excellent, really champion by nature, not just by title, Razan al-Mubarak of COP28 is one of the blessings. And I hope that if you have a chance to be in Dubai, to come to meet her, because many of the areas of your focus are very much in her domain, nature, biodiversity, and linking the whole thing to development, finance, and of course, climate. When I was at the World Bank, I initiated something called SDGs and Her, which is basically beyond SDG 5, which is on gender. Of course, at these days, we're trying to make the case. But I think this is a blessed year to have a professor winning the Nobel Prize in economics for her work in gender. So they have a lot of talk and substantive discussions about gender development, especially links with growth and in the job market. At making matters closer to the climate and extractive agenda of relation to waste. So we worked a bit on issues related to labor market dynamics, and the issues related to a cyclical economy. And then somebody said, if you are really into extractives, you need to remember that your best mining could be not in extractive sector, but basically in better waste management, especially with the kind of investments that are now required in order to have the more sophisticated waste management when it comes to electronics, devices, batteries, mobile phones, laptops, all of that kind of work. And then there have been some sort of genuine calculations of what they are really trying to extract from better waste management system. Then, of course, we're talking until then about issues related to waste, their impact on environment, their impact on hazards, including health hazard, and issues about the role of society. And that was very much vague and opaque as well, until we managed to have something that I like to alert you to, which is basic about how to projectize and operationalize the work through what's so-called now the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda. We've tried to spell out all of these kind of obscure issues that were reflected in the Paris Agreement into work programs, water management, food security, agricultural system, and then the agricultural system and food, they are subject to a great deal of issues when it comes to waste and waste management. And then comes closer to home or households. This is the issue about settlements. And here you get women as basically in the center of waste management from the beginning to the end. And the issues about investment in knowledge, in culture, appreciating the value of waste management, providing some tools have been really an area that we have been working on as a champion. I supported work at the regional level because the global system is in trouble these days with lack of leadership and lots of shocks. So when you have problems at the global level, we go to regional and local levels. So I have regional pipelines of projects. And I'm happy to say that many of the projects happen to be women-led with entrepreneurs, not just from the usual micro to small enterprises, but from larger scale, or even if they are smaller, they are very much critical in the supply chain. But coming close to the local level, we have here in Egypt an initiative called Green Smart Projects initiative, just as education plus investment opportunities, because people are asking why a developing economy like Egypt had to host COP27 with tens of thousands of participants. I'm happy just to mention 3 projects that were winners among the 1,045 projects submitted from only one track, which is related to women and gender-supported projects, where we have women as owners or managers, in addition to other tracks like youth-led large projects, community development projects. Of the 3, the 3 projects I like to mention, one, a project that benefits from the remains of scrap and consumable materials, recycling to produce clothing products. Another one is a project that empowers women working in the recycling of date palm waste, producing innovative, environmentally friendly products. A third is a project that trains women and girls on how to sort, recycle, and generate new products from e-waste. So here we're talking about projects coming from rural Egypt primarily, not from the more urbanized areas. And they are really trying to see to what extent they can use their talents, their skills, their networking, the ecosystem, in order to create value almost out of nothing. What they needed, because these are all projects in existence, scaling up and replication. Because you get into this business, lots of scattered ideas, but they could really benefiting a great deal from scaling up and replication. What would help in doing that is basically the issue that I spend all of my time trying to do is finance, with the help of some work that actually led by an MIT-based lab from Esther Duflu, the work on poverty and mixing finance with technology. And the third is incentives. So we need to have the three together in order to do better in replication, scaling up, and making behavioral change. Finance, R&D, affordable technology, possibly. And the last one is basically installing more investments in incentive structure and regulatory framework. And you'll be seeing more of that. It's just a teaser to what you expect at COP28. Over to you, Dean.
I mean, that's amazing, Dr. Mahmoud. I wish that, my boss, Professor Fiona Murray, was on this call, because you mentioned some really critical elements. So finance, R&D, affordable technology. And obviously at MIT, we talk about these things quite a bit, especially in relation to global growth markets. I guess I just have a very particular quick follow-up question to you. When it comes to women entrepreneurs, specifically innovators in the waste space, you mentioned a couple amazing examples from Egypt, and I would argue broadly, I'm Egyptian, so is Delila. In the Arab region more broadly, the amount of financing that goes, I would say risk capital, that goes to women is dismal. And I wonder if this year in COP28, and I know that you and I have discussed this maybe before in a session that we had last time, but and Her Excellency Razan Mubarak has been carrying the flag of women for sure, and she's so eloquent and amazing in how she does it. But in COP28, will there be space, for example, for those in the risk capital space, specifically those venture capital funds who really, don't understand the significance of waste and focusing on the circular economy, but more specifically, really don't focus on eliminating the bias they have towards women entrepreneurs, to really educate and elevate that space to the significance and importance of not just investing in women, but also investing in the circular economy and in waste in particular?
Well, the short answer, yes, there will be. And actually, her and I were discussing an initiative that is going to be announced on the private sector and philanthropies together to provide not just the funding, but the guidance, technical assistance, mentorship, issues related to capacity development, because we have been stuck with something that, especially since Glasgow, people claim that we have the money, we have the trillions of dollars, the GFANs, the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, the claim that they can really have $125 trillion dedicated to climate action in all areas of work, including what we're discussing now. And what we're seeing in reality in the funds going to developing economies and emerging markets, this is really a worrying figure that I'm sharing with you. Net capital flows are zero today because of the higher interest rates, and they are going to be turning negative next year because of the fact that interest rates are getting higher. Debt service of many of these developing economies are due, and they are going to be due as well next year. So we're not really seeing any kind of capital flows for low risk, mid risk, high risk to waste management or to other projects. There is, and the FDI,
that's right,
because of two things, because of incentives with generosity in many of the advanced economies, including the IRA in the US, the green initiatives in Europe and many advanced economies. Again, they are attracting investment to their side. So what we're trying to do, we can spend time complaining, but what we're trying to do is basically creating this platform that will have the public-private partnerships with philanthropies, with the issues about higher risk kind of engagement that could benefit women, and it could be as good sectorally in the waste management, because this is part of the adaptation agenda. And with more work in this area with its own opportunities, I think people will start realizing the benefit. Here, altruistic behavior may not really be the dominant factor, although that we have philanthropies, but basically about possible return, commercial return, or impact, which is basically the kind of thing that the philanthropies are after. So that is going to be mobilized for that.
Great, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm very familiar with the Business and Philanthropy Forum that is being led by Badr Jafar. I hope that venture
This is
capital.
the one. This is exactly the one.
Yes,
In
I know.
addition to the initiative of Dr. Sultan Al-Gaber on
Yes.
the public-private partnership.
Yes, wonderful. And I hope that they will include more venture capitalists in this. And at MIT, we have a huge network of venture capitalists across global growth markets who I think are very passionate and are ready to be more active if they're brought into the equation. So Carlos, I'd love to move to you. I want to bring us back to this triple planetary crisis. So I think despite the fact that its impact on the environment is clear, the connection between waste and that triple planetary crisis is still poorly understood. The question I have for you is, how can stakeholders from government to business, so all across the spectrum of different stakeholders in this space, really create a greater sense of urgency at this juncture between waste and climate change? And how can we leverage this urgency to create new initiatives and investments specifically around women-led entrepreneurship and innovation in this space?
Thank you, Dina. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really happy to be here this morning with good friends and with new friends. Looking forward to win this battle. Well, first of all, I would say this sense of urgency is really missing. And as I'm using many of my presentations, I would say that everyone needs to have a picture of Earth seen from space, hanging in front of us, where we cannot avoid looking at it on a daily basis. We need to realize that we are living in a planet with boundaries, that we have clear limits from where we can go, from where we can extract things. And we need to realize that until now, it's the only planet we found that can sustain life in the form that we know it. So we really need to realize that what we are doing now, our practices, our behaviors are affecting the structures of this planet. And the inability to understand this connection has led us to the current situation when we are facing the triple planetary crisis, a multi-crisis that we need to address at the same time: pollution, biodiversity loss, climate change. We need to find solution to those threats at the same time, and we need to win it, because it's the only chance to continue living in the planet. So we really need to raise our voices. We need to work every day to make this connection and really bring very clearly this sense of urgency. Because the business as usual model we are implementing now for decades is definitely contributing to the current situation, and it's no longer a solution. So we need to change the current business model. We need to change the paradigm. We need to change the perspective. And here lies one of our greatest challenges, which is really the movement for change, because this is something that many people really repel, because we are afraid of changes. We are kind of not used to really shift to a different path. And then it comes the challenge to really sustain this change with women-led initiatives. This must be part of the change. This must be part of the new perspective. And considering the urgency, we need really to seek for new alternatives and new solutions under the new paradigm, under the new perspective. And I believe that at this point, women-led initiatives, as we are seeing in different parts of the world, have a lot to contribute to really lead this transformative agenda. But despite this huge potential, there are some obstacles, and really to make it a reality. So I believe, for example, that initiatives like this webinar, when we can bring several experts from different parts of the world to share experiences, to bring light to existing solutions, so we can disseminate these best practices to wider audiences where we are heading to. For example, next week we have the ISWA Solid Waste World Congress. 2 weeks later, we have the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for the Plastics Agreement, another very big and high-level event. Then at the end of November, early December, we have COP28. So we will be honored, ISWA will be honored to host the first ever Waste and Resources Pavilion at a COP28. We need to use those spaces. We need to use those arenas to highlight this potential. We need to use those arenas to show, to share the existing experiences and engage the broader audiences to really learn that if we need to change, we need to change to a completely different situation. We need to change to a completely different approach. And this approach must be led by really innovation, entrepreneurship, and must be led really, I believe, by women who are willing to be transformative. Because we from the male side, we prove that for many decades, we didn't take the world to a more sustainable situation. So let's do it together, and we will be supporting actors for sure. We will be there as supporting actors, but the leading role, well, I'm sure, will be developed by women. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm pausing for a second just because I think everyone in the audience is I'm sure feeling that this really speaks to our hearts as well as our minds. You know, I think you said something for me that was really important, which is that there is an enormous resistance to change. And I think that the reason why we resist change is because change requires sacrifice, and it means that we have to give up something. And we don't like to give. Different stakeholders don't like to go through that process of loss and giving something up. And I'd love, Professor Godfrey, I'd love to switch to you, because I think, as Carlos said, if we're going to see things shift, we need to see some radical collaboration, but we also need to see a willingness to break some of the structural barriers to the change that is required. Now, it's easy to talk about the change, but to really make the structural changes required, that's a whole other ballgame. And to also create a space where people can feel comfortable enough to work through what they would have to lose in order for progress to be made. That's a difficult thing to do, right? It's against our natural human nature, but that requires a really radical leadership too. But it also requires leadership that is willing to sit in that tension long enough for collaboration and change to happen around a very common purpose. So my question is to you is really, how can we go about breaking the silos and really strengthening collaboration and problem solving between this nexus of waste, gender, climate, finance, so that we can actually move to a much better place?
Thanks, Dina. Well, first of all, I find it very interesting, and your comment for me highlights the lens through which we view this particular issue. Your comment was, you know, change means you've got to give something up, which maybe is that global north, high consumerism. You're now asking me to do less, to use less, to consume less.
I don't want to say that out loud.
So you know, for us from a developing country context, maybe change means more opportunity. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for improved livelihoods, quality of life, access to greater resources. But I think that's a whole separate discussion we could have for another day. But I think first of all, you know, to touch on this issue of, you know, waste, climate, gender nexus, I think it's, you know, this issue is such a long time coming to actually get to this point of discussion. And I'm really excited in terms of where we currently are, because first of all, I think just in terms of the waste climate link, waste was always seen as this, oh, well, it doesn't really contribute to much, you know, it's really just emissions from landfill site. It's not a big issue. We'll worry about energy, we'll worry about mobility, we'll worry about agriculture and things like that. And more we're starting to realize, I think as we've transitioned to more of the circular economy discussion, we've started to realize that in fact, if we stop products from becoming waste in the first place, there is significant opportunity for greenhouse gas mitigation. And I think, you know, the International Resources Panel, the figure was what, 50% of climate impacts come from the extraction and processing of resources. So if we can extract and process less, obviously linked to consuming less, then there's direct climate benefits. But I think also what's been great to see, and maybe for somebody who's been in the waste sector for 25 years and a very male-dominated waste sector, it's incredibly exciting to see the increasing number of women that are coming to the sector now, that we're starting to talk about more than just landfilling waste, that we're starting to talk about the upstream interventions of how do we prevent waste from being generated in the first place, how do we reuse, refurbish, repair. And maybe it's that nurturing spirit that's within us that kind of attracts us to this topic now of actually saying, how do I make a difference in this particular sector? So I think that's the first thing, is that it's just such a timely discussion, this. I think the second thing is that we've got to be very careful of not just forcing this agenda, because I get a sense that we're trying to fix something on top of a system that's already broken. The fact that the waste sector is not seen as an attractive sector for investment, it's seen as high risk. We've seen a lot of the investment being donor funding, where someone will come in, they'll build a landfill site, they leave, and you go back a year later, and the landfill site is being run like a dump site. And so we don't have the sustainable investment that's actually making a difference in developing countries. So I think that is the first one. It's just, and many of the speakers have already touched on this, just the lack of access to financing. I think the second issue, though, and this is not even related to gender, is just it's incredibly difficult for entrepreneurs, men and women, to make a sustainable business or a sustainable living out of the waste sector for various reasons. So first of all, we have to just find a way to make entrepreneurs more sustainable. How do we create that safety net for entrepreneurs to thrive and to grow and to really make an impact? Dr. Mahmoud spoke about how do we scale and replicate these initiatives. And to do that, you need a safety net that they know that they can fail and try again. And you know, anyway, I won't belabor that point. And then I think the third one really is, so if we can get those first two issues right, now how do we make sure that women have a strong voice within this space to make a difference as well? And I think that, again, women face a number of obstacles in terms of being successful entrepreneurs, successful businesswomen. And I think we've got to be very careful around generalizing as to what those reasons are. I think certainly there was a UNIDO study done in South Africa back in 2020 around, it was a policy assessment for economic empowerment of women in green industry. And they identified things like, you know, lack of technical skills, specialized knowledge, lack of awareness about policies, lack of access to technology that some of the previous speakers have made reference to. Lack of markets to sell into, for example. But I think there are also nuanced reasons. I saw, you know, I was looking at some of the comments that came up in the chat box around what are we doing for women that live in informal settlements or peri-urban areas. So, you know, the reasons for informal workers, for women working in informality, might be very different to the reasons for women working in the formal waste management sector. And I think we need to be just very sensitive to this particular issue. So I think to just sum up, I think that we've got to look, you know, I hate this word holistically, but we've got to look at really how we fix the bigger problem while also driving the women waste climate nexus forward. Because I don't think if we don't fix the financing plus the sustainable entrepreneurship, it's going to be very, very difficult to drive the support for women entrepreneurs and women-owned small businesses at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Godfrey. I have so many questions, but I also see that the audience is writing lots of questions and want to get involved. So I want to ask a question to all of you before we open it up to the audience. And please, everyone who is out there watching, listening, please add your questions to the Q&A segment of the Zoom. You know, the complexity that you have all discussed, and I think specifically what you just mentioned now, Professor Godfrey, around how we have to, like the many layers that have to be fixed. But I keep going back to these incredible structural changes that need to be made so that we aren't just having kind of superficial conversations, but you've all touched upon the importance of creating structural shifts on many different levels at the same time. We can barely create a structural shift. When I think of, you know, I have been one of the advocates for women entrepreneurs for a long time, for the over 20 some years of my career. And when I think of the structural shifts that need to happen so that we can really see true gender inclusion happen in the world, that has yet to happen. And we're talking in one particular space. And you all are talking about structural shifts on many levels. I feel like this often can lead to lack of hope. And then people saying, well, what difference will it make anyway? How can we even go about achieving all these structural shifts across so many different systems? So my question to all of you before we open it up to the group is, where's the hope? And how can we go about creating these changes simultaneously in extremely difficult systems where people are constantly resisting change? And I think maybe Professor Godfrey, I'll stick with you since you really inspired that last question, and then I'll kind of move across the screen and we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, you know, it can be incredibly challenging and overwhelming. I think, you know, I was in a webinar just earlier this week where we were talking also about waste and climate change, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming in terms of, are we truly making a difference, and can we actually have an impact? And what's the definition of stupidity? Continuing to do the same thing over again, hoping to have a different outcome. And sometimes as an environmental scientist, I feel like that. But I think that certainly, again, having worked in the space for close to 30 years, we are seeing positive change. We are seeing these issues at least on the agenda. And I think all collectively, we're trying to make a difference. I think there is a risk that there's a very fragmented space. You know, even just within South Africa, I see it in terms of fragmentation in funding that's coming into the system. And the question is, how do you know, could 1 + 1 = 3 if we could actually get people to start working together to drive impact? And then I think a lot of it, you know, a lot of what we're trying to do is really sort of to change it from the inside out. So how do we invest in young women that are coming into our university system? How do we upskill from the inside so that when they go out, they can make that difference in the world? You know, the support that we've been giving in terms of undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships, the next generation of engineers and environmental scientists and social scientists. And then I think the last point is just, how do we showcase and demonstrate that? That's really on the top of my agenda right now, is how do we find those gems, those women that are doing really great work in terms of making a difference? And how do we support them? How do we showcase them? And how do we build on what they're doing that we can replicate it to elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world? Because there is so much good that is being done. And sometimes I think we kind of spiral down in our own little world of doom and gloom, that I'm not making a difference. But there is fantastic stuff happening out there, and we've just got to shine a light on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Carlos?
Well, I was really reflecting here on what has been said, and it's really inspiring for what we have ahead of us. And as I mentioned, these coming weeks will be really busy for all those who work in the environmental agenda, in the climate agenda, because we are really heading to, I would say, a point where either we are together and go move forward to find a suitable solution, or we simply will be discussing like from where do we get hope to continue, Dina? So this is something that bothers us a lot, and like really how to share those messages, how to make these messages understood by those who are at the high level tables, making the decisions we need. Because like I'm tending to say, like, everything that we are talking now, everything that is written now is being said one time after another. We know from like the solution. We know that we need to provide solutions, integrated solutions. We know that we need holistic approach. We know that we need to integrate and catalyze efforts, but we are still lacking to put it into practice.
Mm-hmm.
We know that we need to attract funds and find innovative financing systems to support this transformation. For example, how can we accept we are living in the 21st century, in 2023, and we still have almost 40% of the total waste generated in the world going to dump sites or being openly burned? How can we accept that we have like millions of people living from picking waste from dump sites and streets in the 21st century? We all know that it's not sustainable. We all know that it's not acceptable. We all know that we need to change, that we need to provide more infrastructure. But why are we failing to do that? Because really, we need to act together. And here, like for me, the most important, like we were discussing some weeks ago in New York at the SDG Summit, that we need to accelerate the SDGs. This agenda is there for like almost like 2 decades now, 1.5 decades now. We are halfway to reach 2030. So we need to accelerate, but we are lacking behind the track in many of the SDGs. And for me, the most important SDG is the 17th, is through partnerships. It's through partnerships. So really, we need to bring everybody to this table, to this discussion, to this arena. We need a multi-stakeholders engagement towards the change. Because if we keep trying isolated measures, individual solutions, as Professor Godfrey just mentioned, we will keep getting the same results, and it's not enough. So this will be like answering directly your question, where is hope?
I was hoping, I was going to say, where's the hope?
My hope is through partnerships. My hope is through collaboration, is strong and long-term partnerships and collaboration.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mahmoud, you've been talking about the importance of finance for a long time. And it's not that this is something that you have been talking about since you became a climate champion. You have been talking about the importance of finance, I feel, since the beginning of your career. And where money is allocated has been something you have been talking about for as long as I've known you. And you've also, way before you went to the bank, when you were still a minister in Egypt, you talked about the importance of allocating money to sustainability and to impact. And it's not how money is allocated is not an easy thing to navigate. Where do you derive hope from, and why do you stay the course in this process? And you've done it throughout your entire career.
Right. Everybody has an initiative, great plan, good strategy, until they get punched in the face. And the punch here is basically about finance, because this is the constraint. We are always living under these two constraints for great ideas governing our lives. Time constraint and finance constraints. And while we cannot really deal with the time constraint, especially in areas of priorities, but to do more and faster and accelerate the work. It's like the 2030 agenda just been mentioned by Carlos. We're beyond midpoint, and we're only 12% on target of the 140 targets measured of the 169 of the 17 goals. Only
you're going to give us hope, right? You're still going to give us hope, right?
Well, if you insist. Well, at least there is a great potential, given that it's only 12%. Anything that we can do better on, or if it is bad, we can do less of, that can give us the hope that you're after. But the hope will not really be coming, sorry to say that, from leader summits. I haven't seen much of that now. You go to these summits with great deal of managed expectations. I'm seeing now the hope on localized solutions that could be scaled up. And it's good that many of you, including Professor Godfrey, built on that. But basically, it's not just about being more democratic, more bottom-up approach, but basically these kind of initiatives have a good test of feasibility, because they worked. They worked in many cases as well in harsh environments, higher risk, but they worked. So what we need basically is to create a knowledge platform that could be a good way of using SDG 17, which I always saw as means of implementation rather than a goal, partnerships. And then it could be a mix of both, a goal and a target, but it's mainly means of implementation. And then you go and do all of these things at scale. I have seen good examples that started as local, cooperative kind of work in Brazil and Mexico, then happened to be national, like the conditional cash transfers, for instance, but through knowledge platform, they have been replicated everywhere. M-Pesa of Kenya, a good idea supported by a couple of innovators with a good regulator, being picked by IFC and USAID. Now there is an M-Pesa everywhere with different names, facilitating cash transfers, but more savings and credit instruments. That was very much local solution that had been scaled up. I'm not minimizing the importance or undermining the importance of having big global initiatives, but many of the good local initiatives need to have some sort of recognition, some spotlight on, including issues of waste management. There is a very important question here on the chat, from where we can get data. I worked at the World Bank for 10 years. I can tell you the World Bank will not really have information on who's doing this, but an initiative, because this is a kind of a localized data. You can do it even at a country level, at the national level. You cannot get it in Egypt. But definitely if you go to municipalities, local communities, they would know it. And then you start aggregating. But what would be the value of this? The value, is it a kind of a new supply chain? Is it an incentive structure? Are there new models of action? Could be, as we saw, for instance, two of the big players in the market, multinational firms now in a couple of countries in Africa and Middle East, joining forces in partnership between the private side, their foundations, and providing better tools for the garbage collectors in Egypt, with the who is who in this field as well. Some of them are very well-known business leaders. Some others are from multinational entities and big conglomerates. So here, I think what I'm saying, that there are many good things in existence, as Professor Godfrey mentioned. Partnership could be the tool, but I'm not going to be expecting anymore that the solutions will be coming from the north thrown in the south. I'm not going to be expecting it good if it comes, more ODA. ODA is stagnant in real terms since 2015, official development assistance. I'm not expecting more of the billions to trillions kind of discussions unless we are going to be leveraging that with good environment at the domestic level. And here you can really see the dynamics of competition that can bring hope that you ask for. This is enough hope.
I'm going to hold on to the fact that that is actually something hopeful. I'm going to hold on to that. Delila, can you bring us home? And then I want to bring in a few questions. You know, you have been thinking so long about this, and you've been for months now, you've been thinking about this. And I know that you have ideas for how we can accelerate the potential of women entrepreneurs in the waste space. Obviously, you have hope. Where is that hope coming from?
Well, I think that each of our speakers have touched on that in some way. And let me start by saying I have hope because we have male allies like Carlos and Mahmoud, because we can't accelerate the type of change we want to see without having them standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder with us. So my first hope is that we do have amazing male allies like them that are actually changing the nature of the dialogue, because we wouldn't be able to do it without them. My second hope is going local, exactly to what they speak. I think it's really easy for us to get mired in all the data, the statistics, the new approaches, but go be on the ground, see the change that the people have hope. You know, people have no choice but to have. If you come from our countries, people live on hope. So you want to experience hope firsthand, go to the ground, speak to the people, but more importantly, as Linda said, look for the entrepreneurs and see the impact that they're already having. It is profound. It's easy to get mired up in the complexity of the collaboration that we have to affect that change. But when you can see what one woman, like, for example, Joyce, our fellow Foundry Fellow, UN climate pioneer, employing 350,000 women small farmers, unleashing $500,000 in otherwise revenue that they would have never seen. The profound impact, I think, is where we find hope. The other place I find hope is the new models of thinking and learning, right? So, and this is, you know, the really cool thing, I'm going to get a little personal. My kids just started school here in Cairo. So I'm sitting in front of the principal and he's talking about how, you know, kids can get online. Learning is a different thing. All the knowledge and the data is there. It's not just about us transferring knowledge anymore. It's not just about competing about who has the best idea. It's about how we can more effectively work together to come up with new ideas together that can address the complexity of the systemic change that you mentioned that we need to tackle. So those new forms of learning, the change that's already happening on the ground, that hope that comes from the people, the male allies, and then overall the changing, finally, conversation around the role of women in climate action and in waste, I think that just gives me a profound amount of hope. And hearing everybody here today kind of reflect back to me some of the thoughts I've been having in my little echo chamber gives me even more amplified hope. So thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think, you know, I'm deeply hopeful around how much focus there is on collaboration and partnership. And Dr. Mahmoud knows this, I'm an SDG pioneer for SDG Goal 17, which is for partnerships. But I just hope that as we navigate and we go to COP28, we constantly ask ourselves in every conversation, who is missing? Because I think we talk about collaboration and inclusion a lot, and it's always from this departure point of who is included. And I would say the important question is who is missing? Because ultimately someone is always missing. And that brings me to the question that Anna brought up, which is, you know, when we come to these high-level decision-making platforms that you talked about, Dr. Mahmoud, and the importance of women being at that high-level decision-making table. And with everything that you mentioned, Delila, I'm going to give this question to you, is how can we ensure that we move up from the women that everyone has talked about at those who are at the slum level and in the informal settlements? How do we ensure that those voices move all the way up to those high-level decision-making platforms that continue to be dominated by men? And yes, we have Carlos and Dr. Mahmoud as advocates, and they're amazing. but not everyone is a Carlos or Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin. So how do we ensure that that happens?
That's a great question. I think that people find that question complicated, but it's actually not as complicated as you think. We actually need women in positions of decision making in climate finance institutions, in the governance of those institutions. We need them on boards. We need them in investment committees. We need that climate finance to actually be going to women-led funds and women investors. And why is that? Because women turn around and invest in women. So if you want to break through that structural barrier, that is the way to do it. Women are as investors are twice as likely to invest in women entrepreneurs, 3 times as likely to invest in a company with a woman CEO. And I want to point out that women are getting less than 3% of venture capital and less than 0.2% of climate funding. So if you want an immediate change there, you need to put women in charge of how funding decisions are actually being made.
So I'm gonna say yes, Delila, to everything you say, and then I'm just gonna pose another question to Dr. Mahmoud from the audience, because we at MIT, specifically at the Legatum Center, we talk about risk capital all the time, and we talk about the importance of venture capitalists and risk capitalists and those in the finance space seeing money go to women-led businesses and specifically women-led funds. Women-led funds continue to be dismal. Teeny percentage. Now, the question I have is the one that Sherif brought up for you, Dr. Mahmoud, is that now we're seeing a new wave of climate tech funds emerge. And we're seeing this emerge in the Middle East. We're seeing this emerge in Africa. But there's this one barrier. How do we sell this to LPs who are constantly focused on high returns, high financial returns? Now, what is needed for all of us to shift the mindset of the LPs who really have all the power when it comes to some of these new climate tech funds that are emerging? And even if they dedicate their efforts to impact, even if they say we are going to focus on gender lens investing and women-led companies, you have LPs who stand in the way and say, oh yes, that's all nice, but I still want an extremely high IRR. How do we handle that?
Right. Well, it has been proven as well that many of the good things that happen in this area may not compromise the IRR. So they can be doing well and doing good at the same time. But actually, as we have seen it, there are 3 areas of action that we need to focus on. One is basically about regulations and compliance. Including the tax incentives, and in the past, uttering the word subsidy was a bad thing until the new industrial policies of the US and Europe came with the generosity of incentives associated with subsidies. So here, this is a regulatory and policy side that is required to be developed in order to incentivize those who are still reluctant to make sure that they are playing game. Compliance part, incentives, that could really work between tax and subsidies. And both actually are being used now. And it had been an idea from the past that you don't tax too much and you don't subsidize any. But now what we see in Europe, what we see in the United States, either through the IRA or through the green initiatives, they are a mix of both, and they could be directed in any area, including the discussion that we had today on gender, women, waste management. If this is a priority area, make the regulation speak. And then there's an area here of monitoring, supervision, and compliance, because you can just have laws and regulations and being not applied. Here comes transparency and disclosure about who's doing what. The second area of work, and that could really borrowing perhaps from Delilah's point, if you are inserting good voices in boards, and here this could really be an issue of getting these kind of regulations translated into executive actions from the board. If you are not at the board, you are not going to be with the kind of influence that is required. Now I'm seeing many of the regulations insisting on a minimum of 50% in some jurisdictions, 30% of women in some jurisdictions, or at least 2 in some others. And then this is the second part. The third and final one is basically about all of this kind of non-price competition between the profit seekers. And that's why you see a lot of enterprises today, even if they are not fully convinced of the value, but because everybody's doing it, it's part of the marketing, it's part of what is being expected, but they need to do some good work here and being adhering to the rules. We had more than enough of greenwashing. We do not really like to see that type of washing elsewhere. So what we need here to see is basically some sort of dynamics when it comes to competition between the different firms, because this is becoming a kind of a market standard. But we need really to, and this is a cultural issue as well that need to be invested in. So that could really make that kind of change. Regulations, action at the board levels, and then issues related to non-price competition to push for these changes.
Yeah, perfect. And also, I really hope that when we talk about in a business and philanthropy forum, that we really bring that really broad spectrum of those who are in that kind of risk capital space to the table, including LPs in VCs, so that they can develop that muscle and awareness. And my last question, and then we're going to have to unfortunately close. I know this conversation could go forever, is really to Carlos and Professor Godfrey. Is, you know, there's been so much discussion around the local versus the global and how to really connect, and everyone has touched on this, including all of the panelists. From both of your perspectives, how do we make sure that the local, regional, and global are all interconnected, and that those who are at the very local levels, one of the participants brought up the point that behavior will change through your neighbor, not necessarily through what somebody says at COP28 at a very high level. So how do we ensure that alignment happens, and that we're doing also what Dr. Mahmoud mentioned at the beginning? How are we connecting the local, the regional, and the global together, and ensuring that these voices are all there connected, specifically in this nexus that we're talking about? So Carlos, I'll start with you. If you could just give some brief remarks, and then I'll move to you, Professor Godfrey.
Thank you, Dina. I was just thinking about it, about really we need to start with this local movement and building on what Delila mentioned. I believe that we need to combine both a new perspective on how developing new public policies, new framework. And again, we need to change the perspective. We have prepared like 3-4 years ago, a publication called a manual for social communication in waste management. And I was just remembering it, and there is a big 1-page message. It's time to build policies with people and not anymore to people. So we need to engage local citizens to really discuss. We need to, let's say, to rise this feeling in the common people, as we have here in the chat, talking about people who are living in settlements, in the small communities, that they are part of the game. And one thing that I'm trying to share is, like, when I go to those high-level events, to those international gatherings, how do we connect what has been discussed there to our daily lives? This is important, because I'm saying, like, we have usually national representatives sitting at the tables, discussing, setting and signing agreements, but at the end, it's not reflected, it's not internalized within our own countries, within our own communities. So really, we need to start building this bridge, building this gap. And we have several instruments for that. And for example, the new way of communication, we have this like really platforms and communities online, and ISWA is one of these platforms. We are really aiming to connect and engage and really prepare for the future, because we have a voice, we have a seat at the table, and we must be heard. So this is really, really how I see things moving forward.
Thank you, Carlos. Professor Godfrey, I'm going to ask you to bring us home on this one.
Oh, no pressure.
I know that you can handle it.
Well, I think for me, we require a suite of interventions here. I think that we need to work at all three levels. We've got to have the national conversations around the right policy in place. We've got to have the gender content and commitments in our green policies to move us forward. I think we need brave leadership to take us to where we need to go. We need to have that vision, and we all need to be on the same path. But I think also we need organizations working on the ground to drive change, because I think that's where we have the ability for greatest impact. We need those change agents. We need to be working with community-based organizations, with entrepreneurs. We need to be creating the space for the really good work that's happening. So I think, yeah, a combination of both of those, but ultimately, you know, we need that vision that we're all pulling in the same direction, because I think, to reiterate what Carla said, the frustrating thing of having worked in the sector now for nearly 30 years is we know what needs to be done. Let's just get on and do it.
Yeah, I hear you. Change is hard, and I'm with you. So with that beautiful way of closing, I know this could go on forever, but I do want to say that Her Excellency Dr. Rizan Al-Mubarak has agreed to come back kind of post COP28 and also share with everyone what happened at COP28 and her own vision of where things are going to go specifically when it comes to women in waste and the nexus we've been talking about. And I know that Dr. Mahmoud will come back again. He doesn't say no to me, and I appreciate that. So I just wanted to thank everybody and thank all the panelists. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, not long enough. And for those who will be joining the roundtable conversation and the working sessions to actually start building this white paper with us and co-creating this white paper with us, we'll see you in the other link. And Dr. Mahmoud, we're really going to count on you. We will be producing a white paper that summarizes a lot of the key elements and points that have come out in this particular conversation. And I know that Delila and I won't be going to COP28, but we will rely on all of you to share this important conversation with those at COP28 moving forward. So thank you all again. This has been wonderful. And Delila, thank you for bringing all this together. And I just want to again thank EngineeringX and IDRC for making this possible and for allowing us all to come together. And so I'll see some of you in another link. And thank you all again. I appreciate all of you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Great discussion, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.